Well, hello and good morning from a very snowy England. It is freezing cold. Even Mr. Miro has got his jumper on today, haven't you? You've got your jumper on today because you're so cold. So, today in my magical inky world, me and Mr. Miro are going to talk about our comic. Our comic that is very different style. It's a very different theme. It's very different in every way, and it's all going to be on ink on paper, and we're going to talk about that today, aren't we? So if you'd like to talk about some comic-y ideas and thoughts, this way. Welcome to Little China, the world of Little China, who is this super cute, very cuddly teddy bear. And that was the label that was on the bears. And we made thousands of these back in the day. And he was on the cover of the Teddy Bear International magazine in the UK. And he ran as a comic strip in the magazine for a couple of years, I believe. And it was it was such a magical period of time. And Little China was my shot at something that I thought was going to be huge. He was such a beautiful panda with little white embroidered ears, and he went off to be in that magazine. We also did a competition, and he appeared on the cover of the magazine. I think he appeared in the cover twice. I still have the magazine somewhere tucked away, and that was what the comic was. The comic was built around this little beauty. So that is Little China, and he is now, at the end, we actually gave about, I don't know, more than 1,000 bears probably away to all the children's hospitals and and things like that. And that just got to a point where the whole kind of idea of the merchandising, and we went on to make a 3D cartoon show of Little China, which you could probably find on YouTube somewhere, or clips of it on YouTube somewhere. And we made lots and lots of comics. I think we made about 13 comics and about 28 children's books. So it basically was a comic. And the basic thought of the comic was that it was a 2-strip comic, and that would fit on the bottom of a magazine. Can you see those? So you'd have 2-strip, 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 and they would be running at the bottom of a magazine, which they did for a few years. And that was a beautiful concept at the time. But now in this modern times, the thought of having a magazine with a comic seems to be almost forgotten about. And today everybody is watching all their comics on something like that. A telephone. So the idea now is to start the comic again. Start all that madness again. Why, Kieran, I hear you say? Because it was such a huge part of my life. And I got almost addicted to writing the stories for him. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sketchbooks, notebooks, like these, where inside they are basically all the planned out stories. Can you see that with the light? Let's see. There you go. And you can see that they are pages and pages and pages. I'll show it for that camera as well. And there are pages and pages and pages of all these stories that I had written out for the comic. And there's hundreds of them. There's pages after pages after pages. And they just go on forever. And I had so many beautiful ideas. And I got so crazy about it that I would go on and I would draw up so many different books of it. So many different stories. You see the way that, like, they're just, again, it's the light. Look, thousands of like little story ideas. And I did it for years. I just got to a point where I was kind of like addicted. You can see pages and 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 pages of stories. And what happened was that I would keep writing the stories in the thought that this was going to be my Calvin and Hobbes, you know. This is going to be my comic that I would draw for the rest of my life, and I would not need any other job or any, you know, kind of stop all the animation ideas and go on and do this amazing comic that would last forever. And that would be in 100 years, people would look back and say, oh, I remember Little China, and, you know. And I'll just flick through a few more of the, and these were some of the covers, the book covers. There you go. That was one of the book covers there of him on a rocket to the moon. He had Fun One was his rocket. And I loved it. And the whole idea of drawing a comic for the rest of my life was just delightful. And obviously over the years, I've gone on to do other projects and other ideas and so many other books, and it kind of got lost in the time. Also, the editor changed on the magazine, and they decided not to use the Panda anymore after so many years. It was a little bit silly, and we built up a great following, and it was very difficult to kind of keep that following going, keeping that interest, because the magazine had stopped using the comic, and I tried to do it on the internet, but this strip, this 2 lines, just seemed inadequate. And in recent days, I have been thinking about getting a new piece of paper and drawing it more in a telephone format, a A4 type format. So we did the books, and I loved the books. The Clunkin' and Clankin' was just an additional book we did over the Christmas period, and we did a lovely Christmassy cover to it, which was actually taken from the first ever comic. The first ever strip was him waking up and finding the snow. He had fallen asleep, and when he woke up, it had snowed, and he was covered in snow. And that was one of the first ever comic strips. And it was just a beautiful thing. It was a very kind of like childish philosophy, if you wanted to put a tag on it. And I absolutely loved it. And so today I thought I would get in and maybe take a pose. Now probably I'll probably have to. This might take a little bit longer to explain, but I will try and go in and explain some of the concepts of his way of the poses and some of the concepts of the way that the comic was and the way that the comic will be. So I'll start off with some of the was it just a biro, if the biro works, and explain some of the structure of the panda. And now he was very much designed on a triangle, and the idea of him being a baby with very big feet and very big hands, and a small body was basically the original idea. So we would start off with a kind of triangle shape. Is that coming up? And what was built on that was this fact of never having it stiff that we always had a pose, we always had a lean, we always had something. And the way that we would bring that in was we would bring in the body line. I mean, I could probably draw this in brush as well. The way that I did these was with these brush pens. They're everywhere now, but back in 1995, I saw these when I was working on a feature film, an animated feature film, and it was, I can't remember which one it was it? And one of the artists was using one of these brush pens, and I'd never seen one before, and it kind of gave me this idea to draw my. This was just before I'd gone to China, where I worked for many years making cartoons for Western countries, and it gave me this lovely new line. It gave me this kind of wobbly line, and it gave me this lovely natural kind of bounce to the line. And because of that, because of this pen, it inspired me. It literally did inspire me for the whole look of the comic. Now, I was obviously working in animation, so at that time my process was very much about drawing it with a blue pencil, which was basically about planning everything off and being very, very, very meticulous about what the fingers were doing and planning the whole drawing out, which I don't do anymore. And so if I want to draw an arm, I would be planning it out and drawing it with a blue pencil, as you do in animation, and drawing all the details first. So these comics became a huge undertaking. A huge undertaking of pencil mileage, basically. I mean, everything would be drawn out very, very meticulously with a blue pencil, and then I would go on with my brush pen, and then I would draw the poses, and I'd draw the poses quite big, They were all quite big, and they were painted in a watercolor style. So they had this kind of watercolor, every hand and every arm had a shadow, and so there was a lot of work that went into these. All the drawings were then scanned, painted and scanned, which way around it. And this brush gave me this lovely, natural, thick and thin, which for me was a very, very beautiful way to imagine this panda with a soft edge, like with the very clean ink line. It always just kind of seemed very hard, like it was a plastic kind of feeling, and these brush pens gave him a very fur-like approach. And the way of drawing his body and his hands and everything started to have this beautiful weight to them. So his body concept would be very much about leaning the pose and bringing the hand up like, oh. And it got me very, very, very excited, because it, part of the idea of working in animation is that you have to learn to draw a character in 1,000 different poses. You have to draw it standing and bending and jumping and running and falling and dancing, and so it kind of gave me this beautiful thing that I could show all my talents of poses. So if I wanted to draw him bending over, then I would have to have the weight. And I loved this idea of weight. It was something, again, that was brought into me as in the early stages of animation, of this kind of natural way that things find their weight. You know, when you see somebody standing there, finding the balance and the weight. If there's too much weight, they will fall over. And I came up with this lovely way that I could draw the bear. I'm sorry if this doesn't show up as a pencil drawing, but I will draw it in ink in a minute. And then I could draw these hands, and these hands were I love drawing the hands. And I know a lot of people hate drawing the hands, but I love drawing the hands on the panda. And that's where his tie is there. And his tail, of course. Now again, this was something that I found out later on, that pandas don't really have a patch. In my childish mind, I thought that they had a patch on their eye and a patch on their arm. You know, they had a black arm and a black leg, and I thought they had a black tail. It was just, and I guess that's the luxury of being a creative artist. You can add these things. So the weight was with these beautiful big feet that I designed for the panda, and these very large kind of feet gave me this over impossible way to have him bending, because the very large feet kind of gave him almost this power of you know, like the guy in that space movie, whatever it is, when he's leaning back like that, you know. And it gave me this beautiful weight. That leg for me is beautiful. The very heavy weight, and the very heavy kind of, and the very light and small top. So I had this huge flexibility for his drawing purposes. And so when these drawings were done, and they were all done very large, like they are now, they were done this size, and they were painted, and so each comic strip was a lot of work, and then all painted in that kind of watercolor style. It was a huge and crazy idea. But, you know, when you're doing these things, you think, well, you know, in 100 years, when someone's looking back and saying, "Wow, look at that! I never knew this Little China Panda Bear comic was so beautiful. Look at all the detail in it." And you know, as we are as artists, we are those type of people that we will say, well, you know, you're kind of like the Commitments, that guy who's sitting in the bath, and that's kind of like me in the bath. I'm kind of like sitting there. Well, yes, Mr. Wogan. When I came up with the idea for the panda, blah 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 blah, you know. So in my mind, that was kind of like, I have to draw this panda, and with all the beauty and the detail, and all painted up so delightfully, that one day they'll put a whole gallery for the panda, and people will come from miles around just to see all the drawings and the paintings of this lovely Little China. And also at this point, I have to explain Little China. Little China is not like Little Britain for the country. Little China is very much an English expression. It's kind of like the way you would talk with a little child, a small person, and you would say, "Be careful, my little China," like my little fragile, you know, like my little fragile person. And so that is why he had the name Little China. The fact that he was a panda, the fact that he was in China, kind of went against the name because it didn't really help. Because everybody thought that the story was about a little China place, where it's actually about a little China bear. In this case, it is Little China Panda Bear. So the goose, who is like all worldly and knowledgeable and like to basically play tricks on the panda in the story, was basically about him saying, "Oh, little China, like my poor little thing, my poor little friend, my uneducated." So yes, little China is a sweet term. In fact, I have a signed CD by a singer called Andy Irvine, who plays mandolin and bouzouki and was one of my great musical heroes. And when I told him I'd been living in China and I'd come to see him play, he wrote on my CD, "To Little China," almost like to my little fragile friend type of thing, which I thought was so sweet. And so there we have a couple of the ways the poses are, and the way that, and I'll do another quick one, but this is an introduction into Little China, and I will be kind of getting back into drawing the comic again, and I will very much be excited about the process, and I will try to get some of the process in. I'm not sure how the best way to film drawing a comic, except in the kind of the modern way of kind of clip, which I kind of get very dizzy about. So again, if he's leaning, I would have drawn his body in a leaning pose with his now famous little red tie. Now, the original drawing for Little China, I started a t-shirt company. One of my crazy ideas years and years and years ago, and one of my sketched ideas was a bear which became a panda, and it was in a snow globe. Those snow globes, you kind of shake them and all the snow falls. And I thought it'd be very cute to have a bear standing in the snow and kind of watching the snow falling. And that was the original drawing. And it sat around in my studio or my room, my home studio. It sat around there for so long, and it never got used. And it was one of those drawings that I always came back to. And you find that as an artist, you find there is a drawing that you will do, and you'll put it on the side, and you think, something about that one. There's something about that one. And you'll keep coming back to it. So Little China was that drawing, and it never got used for anything. And it just sat and looked at me. And then one day, when my family was away, I decided, in my scribblings around, I saw that picture and I thought, I'm going to draw some legs on that little bear. And so I did. And it became a beautiful design that I could not escape. And my mind, for some strange reason, just fell in love with it. Here I'm just going to open the toes a little bit just to show you some of the flexibility of and how obsessed I became with this character, and how obsessed I became with drawing him. One of his friends became an artist, and he collects all the rubbish to make all his art, and it was another thing of sitting there for hours drawing a bin with a TV on it with an aerial and a cup and a umbrellas, and I made this whole, and I drew for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days. And so there you have a couple of the basic ways that I would use balance in these poses, and hopefully you will see them in the comic. And over the next few days I'll start to draw some of these poses the way that I'm using the weight for the character, using this triangle form. In fact, even if he sits, the triangle form, I'll just draw it straight with a brush. There would be this type of thing with this triangle, so there would be a constant triangle kind of feel for, I mean, this is a very rough one because there's no pre-plan on this one, but it's basically that, and you would have his tie that would fall here. And again, it's that triangle keeping the balance of the weight. So even if he's sitting in that way, if he leans over to do something, you can see that he's based. He's got that weight. And even in the toy, we put a lot of weight into the feet and the hands. So when the toy falls, he will always fall in a beautiful pose. He'll fall, if you drop him, he'll fall into his kind of seated pose. If you throw him on his shoulder, there will be enough weight on one side with the hands and one side with the feet to stay there all day. So it was a lot of obsessive design that went into this character. So that is a little bit of a breakdown of Little China and of the style of it, and using these kind of, can you see, it's like a brush pen, that's all it is, and it gave me this fur effect that I loved. And I'm going to not rework, because it really isn't a rework, because the original comic I'm extremely happy with. Through all my life, there's a lot of work that I could quite honestly look at and say, maybe I'm not so happy with that, and I'm not so happy with that. But the panda always comes back, and people always mention the panda. People always say, "Oh, are you still doing Little China?" I'm not doing Little China. But we went on to do 52 episodes in a animated 3D form, and lots of books. And now I'm going to come back and try and do it in a bigger story, really. I mean, you're taking 2 lines of a comic into basically 4. So it's going to be an A4 type format. So if you could see, if I took that and say that that's part, you would only see that part in the original drawing, and now you're going to be seeing that. So the stories will be bigger. The stories will be much more fuller. They'll be full, and there'll be a lot more drawing in there, and there'll be a lot more concept in there. So over this next while, I will start to draw some of the comic strips, and hopefully I will film them for you guys to see. But it is already in a book form, and there's very little. The title, the only addition there will be Little China Panda Bear, maybe The Adventures of. His color will stay the same, his friends will stay the same. There's a few of the animated characters that we added to fill out the stories. We added a crazy monkey, we added an elephant, and a few others, and they kind of basically filled out the stories, so that if we wanted to be a little bit more of an adventure where he goes off to the mountains, that he could sit on the elephant and go to the mountains, rather than just always going with the old duck and the bee. So it opened it up to such beautiful possibilities that I think the animated version could have gone on forever. It could have been like a Pokio or a whatever, a Peppa Pig or something. It could have gone on forever. One of the things that I learned from Calvin and Hobbes, and Calvin and Hobbes was one of my kind of heroes really on the side of comics, as it was with Lots. Again, you can see on that drawing over there, you can see the weight on his body as he's lying down, which is another reoccurring pose. Here's this black. Now I learned, or not really learned, but I guess I learned it from watching what Calvin and Hobbes would do. They would sometimes just paint the characters black and have the background white. So you knew that they were in in some kind of night form like that. And there's another one of my animations. Look, there's him running, there's him jumping, and then he's jumping in and he's running and he crashes and he spins and spins and spins and spins. Oh, I loved doing all that. So many different drawings just for one tiny comic, and that was addictive, as L comics should be. So anyway, that is the beginning part of the introduction to Little China, and the introduction to more artwork in that style, more drawings in a brush style, so it's a much cleaner form than I'm used to with the dip pen. So thank you very much for watching the first kind of introduction to the comic. And I hope to see a lot more of these videos showing the comic and the stories and the development and any questions. I'm sure there'll be some questions in there about the dip, the brush pen and the way that it's being used in the comic and such like, and the format of the comic. Any questions you've got, I would love to hear from you. And as always, please subscribe. It helps me along. Thank you very much. And I will see you again very soon for more drawing. Bye-bye.